There are fantasy books that hand you another young chosen hero. Another prophecy and kingdom, another magical destiny we've seen 100 times before. And then there are books that look at the fantasy rulebook and say, nah, we're going to forge something different. And on tonight's episode, we're going to talk about a retired professor, an ancient book, Romanian folklore, forbidden knowledge, power capable of changing the mind and body, and a journey that doesn't ask what somebody can do with extraordinary power. It asks whether they should. Welcome to the Read and Rant podcast.
Welcome to the Read It and Rant podcast, where we don't sugarcoat it, no filters, no holding back, just raw, loud opinions. So turn it up and get ready to rant.
Welcome to the Read and Rant podcast. I'm your host, Tony, and we don't sugarcoat anything. And this is the Rant Forge, the place where indie fantasy gets pulled out of the shadows, thrown directly into the fire, and given the spotlight it deserves. And tonight, on the Forge, it belongs to The Wandering Sage by A.C. Nystrom. So fire up the forge, sharpen them swords, crack open them spell books, alright? Because we're going to embrace the rant. And we have to ask ourselves a question: what is The Wandering Sage? And I want to start with something that immediately caught my attention, alright, about this book. Our protagonist isn't some 16-year-old farm boy, waiting to discover he's secretly the heir to an ancient kingdom. He's Razvan Mazul, a retired professor. Some Indiana Jones kind of stuff going on here, all right? Razvan spends his time translating books and relics for Margrave University until a particular artifact changes everything. An ancient clay-bound book. And whatever is inside this thing isn't just simply history. It contains seriously dangerous knowledge. Through what Razvan discovers, he begins learning about hidden potential within the human mind and body. But here's where this story really gets interesting. Razvan realizes pretty quickly that if this knowledge fell into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. So rather than sitting around waiting for somebody else to deal with it, he sets out to discover where this knowledge originated. And that journey is apparently going much farther than another kingdom down the road. He literally walked through space and time into a world already devastated by the powers that he discovered. That's a hell of a fantasy setup, if you ask me. And the publisher's description specifically positions the Wandering Sage, I'm going to butcher this name, but for fans of Isekai, Elden Ring, and The Lord of the Rings. And anytime you're invoking those kind of names, that god-tier fantasy, you have officially got my attention. And I think here's what I honestly think what makes this book especially interesting is that fantasy loves power. Magic, weapons, gods, ancient artifacts, forbidden knowledge. We really love watching characters really discover that stuff. But one of the more interesting questions, a fantasy can ask isn't how powerful somebody can become. It's what happens when somebody becomes powerful enough that they have to decide where the line is. Because according to the book's description, Razvan doesn't simply discover these abilities and immediately decide, cool, I guess I'm a wizard now. What's up, Gandalf? He recognizes the danger. And that creates something I really want more fantasy books to explore. And that concept alone is responsibility. Knowledge has serious consequences. Power has serious consequences. And sometimes knowing something exists is just dangerous enough. And this book's description specifically frames Razvan's journey as one that will test his morality, while Goodreads describes themes including self-discovery, meaning, power, and responsibility. That is where you can build some damn good fantasy. And then I think we have another thing that caught my attention, because I'm a sucker for mythos. We have Romanian folklore. This book is explicitly described as being inspired by Romanian folklore. And I love seeing indie fantasy pull inspiration from mythos and folklore beyond the same handful of traditions fantasy has returned to over and over again. Because folklore gives authors an enormous toolbox to pull from. Especially when you deal with creatures' beliefs, magic, superstitions, legends, cultural histories, and entire systems for understanding the supernatural. And then an author gets to take those pieces, throw them into the forge, and build something of their own. Like, pow! Like Emerald Glassy, like, boom! That's exactly the kind of experimentation I want the Rant Forge highlighting. Don't give me Fantasy Kingdom number 65 million. Give me something where I can open the book and say, I haven't seen this before. This is amazing. And I want to talk about the protagonist because I really like this choice of protagonist. He is a retired professor of the protagonist of an epic fantasy. Give me that. I want that. Every fantasy protagonist doesn't always need to be young. They don't always need to be inexperienced or overly powerful. Matter of fact, I hate when a character is written overly powerful. And they definitely don't always need to spend an entire book discovering who they are. Razban has already lived a life. That means you're starting with somebody who potentially has experience, with beliefs, regrets, and knowledge, and a seriously established worldview. Now throw that extraordinary power at that person. That's truly interesting. Because the question isn't necessarily who will Razban become when he grows up, it's what happens when a man who already knows who he is discovers that everything he understood about reality may have been incomplete. That's a completely different character journey, and that is something I want to see. The other element that immediately raises my eyebrow is how the book connects with the mind and body. Reader reviews describe Razban's development as involving mental discipline, physical forms, and increasingly extraordinary abilities, while also highlighting the relationship between emotion, intent, and power. And you guys know me. If you're going to give me a fantasy magnet system, I want rules. I want to understand what you can do and cannot do, and what it costs, and what happens when you push that magical ability a little too far. And most importantly, why doesn't everybody just become an unstoppable demigod by chapter 10? That's always the question. So when a book starts playing with the potential of the mind, body, emotion, and intent, my fantasy reader brain immediately starts asking questions. Like, how far does it go? What are the limitations? Can the power truly corrupt somebody? And can somebody lose control? And does using it change you? And what happens when somebody with absolutely no moral compass discovers that same knowledge? Because that is where things can get truly ugly. And I mean ugly in the best possible fantasy way. And I think here's another piece that pushes the Wandering Sage really onto my TBR and my radar. We're apparently not staying home. Razban's search for the origins of this knowledge sends him across time and space, and eventually toward a world already damaged by those same powers. Like, now we're cooking with racing gas, because suddenly we're combining traditional fantasy elements with something much larger. We got knowledge, folklore, magic, other worlds, moral questions, and you potentially got the cautionary tale sitting directly in front of the protagonist. And it's saying, here's what happens when this power goes wrong. That's a fantastic narrative device. You don't have to tell somebody, hey, buddy, dude, this stuff might be dangerous. You can potentially show them the consequences. And if that's where the story goes, that could be extremely interesting. And this is exactly why I created the Rant Forge. Because I said it before and I'm going to keep saying it. Some of the most interesting concepts in fantasy right now are sitting in the indie space. These authors are experimenting. They're pulling from different folklore. Like A.S. Nystrom did from Romania. They're creating unconventional protagonists. They're blending genres. They're playing with magic systems and taking chances. Will every experiment work? Probably not. That's what reading is about. But I'd rather see somebody swing the hammer and try forging something unusual than read the same fantasy blueprint because you're searching for the next, Yaros or Moss. I want to see them get treated with different character names. I want originality. I want something that's going to break the mold, and like A.C. Nystrom did with his book. And The Wandering Sage sounds exactly like the kind of book this segment exists to put on somebody's radar. So going into The Wandering Sage, these are the questions I want answered. Can A.C. Nystrom make Razban's power feel earned? Can the magic system establish rules that make the abilities understandable without stripping away the mystery? How deeply will the Romanian folklore influence the world itself? And how far is Nystrom willing to push the moral implications of forbidden knowledge? And perhaps the biggest question I want answered: what does power do to a person who never ever went looking for it? Because that is the question, folks, I am most interested in. Not whether Razban becomes powerful. I already know we're going to deal with extraordinary abilities. I want to know what that power does to Razban. Does it reinforce the man he already is? Does it change him or tempt him? Does protecting people eventually become controlling them? And at what point does somebody protecting dangerous knowledge become just as dangerous as somebody trying to obtain it? Give me that moral mess, because that's where fantasy gets interesting. So, you may be asking yourself, is The Wandering Sage officially on the Rant Forge radar? Abso-freaking-lutely. You've got Romanian folklore inspiration. You got an older unconventional protagonist. You've got forbidden knowledge, mind and body based supernatural abilities. You can travel through time and space to a devastated world, and underneath all that, you have a story seemingly asking one of fantasy's oldest and best questions. Just because you have the power to do something, does that mean you should? The Wandering Sage is book one of the Soul of Monar series, and it was independently published in March in 2025. Retail listings put the paperback at roughly about 300 pages, depending on the edition and listing. And if you're somebody who wants fantasy that steps outside the usual chosen one formula, this one, right here, might be worth putting on your radar. And I'm going to be honest, I hear tell that book 3 is coming well underway, because book 2 is already out. But I heard chapter 31 just got completed today, so keep that in mind. But I got to say, buddy, AC Nystrom, the Wandering Sage has officially entered the Rant Forge, and now there's only one thing left to do. We found the book. We've thrown it into the fire. Now we find out whether this thing comes out as legendary steel or whether we're going to send it right back into the flames, because finding interesting fantasy is only half the battle. Eventually, I got to read the damn thing. All right. I'm Tony. This is the Read It Rant podcast. Follow Andy Fantasy Author here on TikTok. I'm going to tag him in this video. And remember, support indie authors. Take chances on books outside your comfort zone. Treat books like food and don't knock it till you try it. Read something weird. Read something ambitious. And never be afraid to say exactly what you thought when you closed that final page. Because around here, we don't sugarcoat nothing. We got to read it. We're going to review it. And you know damn well we're going to rant about it. And above all else, damn it, embrace the damn rant. And guess what? Read It and Rant is out.